The engine was already running when my phone lit up on the passenger seat. I was in the middle of a job site walkthrough in Baton Rouge, 3 states away from home, boots caked with red clay, hard hat in one hand, coffee going cold in the other. The foreman was talking. I wasn't listening anymore. The name on the screen was Sandra Kowalski. My next-door neighbor. She never called me. Not once in the 4 years we'd lived on Birchwood Lane. We waved at each other across the driveway. She brought cookies at Christmas. That was the full extent of it. I picked up. She said 3 words before I was moving toward my truck. Come home now. I need to back up. Because none of this makes sense without the part I'm ashamed of. 18 months before that phone call, I married Renata. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about hating her. I don't hate her. What I feel toward her now is something closer to grief. The kind you feel for a version of a person that maybe never existed. She was charming when we met. Quick with a laugh. She had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I was 41, divorced, raising my daughter Poppy on my own for 3 years after her mother passed. I was lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to anyone, including myself. Poppy was 7 when I started seeing Renata. She was 8 when I put a ring on Renata's finger at a small ceremony in my backyard with 12 people watching. Poppy was the flower girl. She wore a yellow dress she picked herself and threw rose petals so hard they hit the photographer in the face. That kid made everyone laugh that day. The trouble started small. It always does, doesn't it? The first thing I noticed was that Renata was different when it was just the 3 of us. The charm dialed down. She got quieter, harder around the edges. I told myself it was an adjustment period. Step-parenting is hard, anyone will tell you that. I told myself Poppy was going through a phase. I told myself a lot of things. Looking back, I was telling myself those things because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. My job takes me on the road. I do commercial construction project management. I coordinate bills, manage subcontractors, sign off on inspections. Good money. Long weeks. I was usually home Friday through Sunday, gone Monday through Thursday. That schedule had worked fine when it was just Poppy and me. Because my mother-in-law, Margaret, Poppy's grandmother on her mother's side, would stay at the house. Margaret was steady. She made grilled cheese sandwiches and helped with spelling tests and watched the same 3 animated movies on repeat without complaining. After the wedding, I asked Margaret to keep coming. Renata said she didn't need a babysitter. Said it like the word tasted bad. She wanted to handle things herself. She said it was about building a relationship with Poppy. I believed her. I gave up the one safeguard that was actually working. Poppy stopped talking as much when I called home in the evenings. She used to give me these long, detailed reports. What she had for lunch, what her teacher said, which kid at recess did something funny. By that winter, the calls got short. Fine. Nothing. I don't know. I thought she was just growing up. 8 going on 15, you know how it is. It was my neighbor Sandra who finally said the thing out loud. She cries in the backyard sometimes. Sandra told me later. I could hear her through the fence. I thought about calling you so many times. But I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be wrong. I understand that. I do. Nobody wants to be the person who blows up a family over a maybe. She called when she was sure. Back to the truck. I had Sandra on speaker before I even got the door shut. She was talking fast, her voice shaking in a way that made my stomach drop. I heard screaming about 20 minutes ago, she said. I thought it was the TV at first. Then I realized it was Poppy. It sounded like it was coming from below ground level. I went to your fence line and I could hear her through the basement window, the little one near the foundation. She was screaming your name, Trevor. She kept saying, Daddy, please, please, Daddy. I rang your doorbell twice. Nobody answered. Your wife's car is in the driveway. The job site, the foreman, the walkthrough, all of it dissolved. How long ago? I said. I've been standing at the fence for 20 minutes trying to decide if I was overreacting. I'm not overreacting. You're not overreacting, I said. You're not. Sandra, call 911 right now. Right now. Don't wait for me. What about, tell them there's a child alone in a basement in distress. Give them our address. Call them before you hang up with me. Okay, I'm calling. I pulled out of the parking lot and I called my brother-in-law, Poppy's late mother's brother, a man named Garrett who lives 40 minutes from our house. He answered on the second ring. I told him what Sandra told me. I told him to get there before the police did, if he could. Then I called a man I served with in the National Guard 15 years ago, Dennis Pruitt, who is now a patrol sergeant with the Shreveport PD. Even though I was in Louisiana and my house is in Meridian, Mississippi, I called him because I needed someone I trusted, absolutely. Someone who knew how to talk to the right people, and because my hands were shaking and I needed to hear a calm voice. Dennis said, "Drive. I'll make some calls. Just drive." I drove. 4 hours and 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock for every single one of them. Dennis reached our local precinct. Garrett reached my house at the same time as the first patrol car. He told me later what he saw when the officers went in. Renata answered the front door calm as anything. Polite even. Said there was no problem. Said Poppy was downstairs playing. Said she couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. One of the officers asked to see Poppy. Renata hesitated for just a half second too long. They found the basement door locked from the outside. Poppy was in the far corner of our utility basement, behind the water heater, on the concrete floor. The lights were off. The only window was the narrow one at ground level that Sandra had heard through. Our basement in that house had a problem with dampness. We'd had a water issue the first spring. And where there's damp, and nobody goes for months, there's going to be spiders. I knew that. I meant to deal with it. I kept putting it off. She'd been down there for 3 hours. She was 8 years old. She was terrified of the dark. She was even more terrified of spiders. Renata knew both of those things. She knew them as well as I did. Garrett said Poppy didn't speak when they brought her up. She walked out of that basement and she just folded, went straight to Garrett's chest and stayed there. He's a big man, my brother-in-law. He just held her in the front doorway while the officers dealt with Renata, and Garrett said he didn't let go for a long time. He was crying when he told me that. This man who coached high school football for 12 years and has never in his life cried in front of another person. I was still an hour and 40 minutes out when he called to tell me she was safe. I pulled over on I-20. Just for a minute, I put my head down on the steering wheel and I stayed there until I could breathe again. Here's what I have to tell you now, because this is the part that changed everything before I ever started suspecting anything. Maybe 8 months before that phone call, I'd done something on instinct that I couldn't even fully explain to myself at the time. I traveled for work. I was gone 4 days a week. My daughter was in the house with a woman I'd known for less than 2 years. And something in the back of my head, some frequency I couldn't name, made me quiet about it. Not paranoid, not accusatory, just watchful. I bought 2 small cameras, the kind that look like smoke detectors. I mounted one in the kitchen and one in the upstairs hallway facing down toward the living room. I put them on a cloud system under my own account. I told myself I'd never look unless I had a reason. 4 months in, I had a reason. It wasn't dramatic. Poppy got into the car one Sunday and she had a bruise on her forearm. I asked her about it and she looked at the window and said she fell. The way she looked at the window is what did it. I checked the footage. I didn't show it to anyone at first. I called a family law attorney in Jackson on a Monday morning. Told her what I had, and she told me to keep recording. Keep dated backups, don't confront. Don't tip anything off. So I didn't. I watched. I documented. I went to work Monday through Thursday, and I came home on weekends, and I made my face do what it needed to do. That was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Harder than anything I've ever put my body through. Sitting across a dinner table from a person and acting like you don't know what you know. By the time Sandra called me from the fence line, I had 8 months of footage on a cloud server. Footage of Renata screaming inches from Poppy's face for spilling a glass of water. Footage of her grabbing Poppy's arm and pulling her down the hallway hard enough that Poppy stumbled. Footage of her on the phone, laughing, while Poppy sat at the kitchen table and cried over homework with nobody helping her. And one clip, maybe 6 months in, of Renata on the phone with someone I later identified as her sister Cassandra. The conversation was short. Renata said, and I have this memorized because I have replayed it several hundred times. She's dramatic. She always has been. Some kids just need to learn what it actually feels like to be scared. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally pulled into my driveway, it was past midnight. Poppy was asleep on Garrett's couch, wrapped in a blanket he'd brought from upstairs. She was wearing her rain boots for some reason. Nobody could figure out why she'd put them on. We think she put them on for protection. 8 years old, in the dark, alone, she found her rain boots and she put them on. I've thought about those boots almost every day since. I sat on the edge of the couch cushion next to her and I just looked at her sleeping for a while. Garrett was in the kitchen. I could hear him moving around, making coffee. Nobody was going to drink. The house was very quiet. I didn't touch her shoulder. I didn't want to wake her. I just sat there. She found my hand in her sleep. I have no other way to explain it. She was asleep, and somehow she found my hand. The arrest happened that night. Renata was charged with child cruelty and unlawful imprisonment. Her sister Cassandra, who I learned had been in the house earlier that day and had left before Sandra called me. She had known what was happening and said nothing, was charged as an accessory. The case moved faster than most child abuse cases do, partly because the evidence was so complete. My attorney submitted the cloud footage through proper legal channels. The prosecutor described it, at one point, as some of the most comprehensive documentation of ongoing child abuse they had ever seen in a domestic case that didn't result in serious physical injury. That last part, that didn't result in serious physical injury. I have a complicated relationship with that phrase, because it implies that the line between where we were and somewhere much worse was thin, and I know it was thin, and I know it was Lynn, and I know that I got lucky. Renata's defense attorney argued that my surveillance was a violation of privacy. The judge ruled against that motion. Mississippi law allows a parent to record in their own home. We had a strong case before we ever walked into a courtroom. Renata was convicted, 18 months on child cruelty charges, with additional time on the unlawful imprisonment count, to be served consecutively. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. I sat in that courtroom and watched the sentence come down. And I thought about the 8 months of what I'd watched, and I thought, not enough. The people who showed up to that sentencing. The women who filled that gallery, strangers who had read about the case, who had driven to that courthouse to sit in those wooden seats. A few of them had signs outside afterward. Protect our children. One woman stopped me on the courthouse steps and grabbed my hand and didn't say anything. She just held it for a second and then walked away. I think about her too. Cassandra received a suspended sentence and mandatory reporting training. I was furious about that for a long time. I'm still not at peace with it. Poppy started therapy 2 weeks after the arrest. Her therapist's name is Dr. Yvonne Beaumont, and she is the kind of person who makes you feel within 30 seconds of meeting her that your child is going to be okay. Not fixed, not erased. Okay. Poppy was in therapy for 14 months. She still goes once a month now, almost 2 years later. She calls it her check-in. The progress has been real and it has been hard and it has been non-linear. There was a period where she didn't want to go into rooms with the lights off. There was a period where she didn't want me to leave for work. I renegotiated my contract that spring. I took a pay cut to stay regional. I drove instead of flew. I stopped being gone Monday through Thursday. My boss, a man named Phil Whitmore, I need to say his name here because he deserves it, pulled me into his office in April of that year and said, "Do what you need to do. The work will be here." I'd worked for that company for 9 years. That was the moment I understood what it meant to work for someone who was actually decent. Some things got easier before others did. She still doesn't love basements. We sold the house on Birchwood Lane that fall and bought a single story in Brandon. No basement. She wanted a dog. I said yes before she finished asking. His name is Tank. He weighs 11 pounds. Here's what I want to say, and I want to say it clearly, because this is the reason I decided to tell this story at all. The comment that gets made most often when I shared pieces of this, quietly, carefully, to people I trust, is some version of, How did you not know sooner? And I understand why people ask that. I asked it myself, every night for a long time, standing in the bathroom at whatever Holiday Inn I was in, looking in the mirror at a guy who thought he was a good father, asking himself how he let this happen. Here's the honest answer. I did know. On some level. In some register that I didn't have words for yet. I knew something was wrong. That's why I bought the cameras. That's why I called the attorney before I ever had the full picture. The knowing came before the proof. The proof just made me legally capable of doing something about it. What I wish I'd done faster was listen to that frequency instead of talking myself out of it. I was afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of what it would mean if I was right. I loved this woman, or I had loved who I thought she was. I was protecting something that wasn't real while my daughter wore rain boots in the dark. I don't know how to wrap that up neatly. I'm not sure it wraps up. What I know is this. If a child in your life goes quiet, pay attention. If a child flinches at something that shouldn't be frightening, pay attention. If a child who used to talk to you stops talking, that's not a phase. That's a message. Listen to it. Sandra Kowalski stood at my fence line for 20 minutes, arguing with herself about whether she was overreacting. Thank God she stopped arguing. Poppy made the honor roll last semester. She is in a theater program on Saturday mornings, and she has 4 friends she talks about constantly. I can't keep track of who did what, and last weekend she taught Tank to sit for a treat, then spent an hour telling me about it in the kind of detail that I used to get on those evening phone calls. What her teacher said. What happened at recess. All of it. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. I will always let her talk. I've thought a lot about what made everything turn out the way it did. Not in a lucky way. Not in a things happen for a reason way. More like, if you trace the line back far enough, every outcome has its roots in a decision somebody made, often a quiet one, often one that didn't look like much at the time. Renata made decisions every week for 8 months that she thought nobody was watching. She made them casually, confidently, the way people behave when they believe there are no consequences coming. That confidence was her undoing. Because the consequences were already being built, file by file, timestamp by timestamp, in a cloud account she didn't know existed, and I made a decision too. A small one, driven by something I couldn't name. I bought 2 cameras and said nothing. I called an attorney before I had proof. I did not let comfort talk me out of what instinct was telling me. That decision, quiet, unglamorous, a little paranoid feeling at the time, is the reason Poppy came home. Not heroics. Not luck. A choice I made on a Tuesday afternoon in a hardware store because something in me said, pay attention. That's the thing about intelligence that nobody talks about enough. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being honest enough with yourself to notice when something is wrong, even when acknowledging it costs you something, even when you love the person you're watching, even when you desperately want to be wrong. Renata counted on me being too invested in the life we'd built to look clearly at what was happening inside it. For a while, she was right. The moment I stopped protecting my own comfort and started protecting my daughter, the whole structure she'd built started to come apart. Poppy put on her rain boots in the dark. She was 8 years old, alone, scared. No lights, no one answering when she called, and she thought, what can I do right now? She put on her boots. That's not a small thing. That's a child who, even in the worst moment of her young life, reached for agency instead of just collapsing. I don't take credit for that. That's who she is. But I do think about it when people ask how she's doing now, because I think the answer to that question was already there, in that basement, in those boots. Garrett drove 40 minutes without asking a single question. Sandra stood at the fence and fought through her own fear of being wrong. Because the alternative, saying nothing, being comfortable, going back inside, was something she couldn't live with. Dennis made calls at 9 in the morning because 15 years ago we made a promise to each other without ever saying it in words. None of these people are heroes in the storybook sense. They're just people who, when the moment came, chose to act instead of wait. That's the whole lesson, every single piece of it. Renata waited for someone to look away. I chose to look closer. Poppy chose to put her boots on. Sandra chose to make the call. The choices we make when nobody's holding us accountable. Those are the ones that build the life we actually end up living, for better and for worse. Every single time.